Are you ready, kids?
Hello, it's Employee A Million, and welcome back to SpongeComs. Today's episode is Season 4, Episode 14, or Episode 74 overall, Bummer Vacation and Wigstruck, both of which originally aired on Nickelodeon across the end of 2006. They both each have individual premiere dates, but funnily enough, they were both nominated for an Emmy, I guess because they're technically packaged as two episodes together. Whenever they premiered first, that would have been the one that they chose for an Emmy. But was it the worthy choice for an Emmy nomination for the 2006 to 2007 broadcast season? That is up for you to decide. But first episode we've got on today is Bummer Vacation, which originally aired October 13th, 2006, and was written by Casey Alexander, Chris Mitchell, and Danny McKaylee. This is Danny McKaylee's first episode credit as a writer in the opening title credits. But he'd been on the show for a couple episodes beforehand. He joined as a staff writer on Dungeons and Dragons, and he was kept on after pitching a few jokes in this episode, so they kept him on, and he continued writing for the show until Season 8, returned for a little bit in Season 10, then left again. Hope he's doing well out there. Hope he's a good sport and all. Because this is a good place to start. And I think Casey Alexander agrees, because when asked about it, he said that this is his favorite episode that he worked on while he was on SpongeBob. So, good taste. There's a couple other teeny little facts about this episode. It's good that I've still got some, interesting info about episodes this far into the run, given, how they'll all start to blend together eventually. Like, by the time you're at Season 8, the episodes do start to blend together, and it's a bit harder to understand. But anyway, back in Season 4, there are still some fun facts about this. This went by a few names before they settled on Bummer Vacation, like Summer Bummer Vacation. One I'm partial to is Obligation Vacation, because it just rolls off the tongue, but Bummer Vacation gets the point across, and it's a neat little pun anyway. And this episode just has a really strong story, and an inevitable one, a perfectly inevitable one for Mr. Krabs, that this is something that he would eventually have to deal with, giving SpongeBob some employee benefits. And I like the way that they do this, teasing the word fine, and then showing that SpongeBob's accumulated too much vacation time, and, some of Mr. Krabs' money is on the line. We don't know how much until the end, but, he is trying his nicest to, keep SpongeBob away from the Krusty Krab. But as it goes on and SpongeBob just gets more motivated to get back into the Krusty Krab, it does sort of become this, I wouldn't say chase, but definitely a very old cartoony, rhythm to the events. But so far in this first half, it's still a bit more grounded and character driven. It does sort of become a little more insane as it goes on, but it's at a pace that works, in my opinion. Like this whole scene of SpongeBob going in just to say hey to Patrick, but then getting into some sort of misunderstanding with the spatula. This is, I think, the most painful part of the episode because of the misunderstanding, but it still works. It still leads into better jokes coming up. And I guess something to ask about this episode, just something to talk about, is this simplifying SpongeBob's character a bit too much? Just making the Krusty Krab everything that he cares about to this extent? Because, that is a common criticism of the post-movie era, that they not only dumb the characters down, make them meaner sometimes, but that they're, reduced to very basic traits just because it's easier to write jokes about those. What I'm basically asking is is this the same guy who wanted to leave the Krusty Krab for jellyfish fields in nature pants? Or is he still someone that is dangerously obsessed with his interests, like in nature pants? Food for thought. And I know that nature pants probably isn't the best example because it has a quite average reputation by pre-movie standards, but still it is something to compare and contrast. Like, are we making SpongeBob too obsessed with the Krusty Krab to the point that, he struggles to live without it for just a couple days? As a matter of fact, it is kind of hard to know the stretch of time that this episode takes place across. It could be a day, it could be a week. I'm not quite sure. It would be funnier if it's just one single vacation day, but yeah, maybe there's some dialogue I'm missing near the end that's just washed over me no matter how many times I've watched it. And I do watch this episode quite a bit because I think that it is really dang funny. This scene coming up right here is one of my favorite parts of the episode. I just love the sound effect that they use for SpongeBob, like, walking away. It's such an inspired sound effect to just have little bits of wood clicking together, just in increasingly lowering pitch. It gets the point across, and it's just paired with a funny visual. So anyway, a scene earlier with the Krusty Krab playset, that is the joke that Danny McKaylee pitched that got him a writing credit on this episode, and I think it's pretty well deserved. That is another one of the highlights of this episode. And hey, there is something here in Jellyfish Fields for anyone, like, making the, observations that I was making a minute or two ago about SpongeBob's characterization. He does have other interests besides the Krusty Krab in this episode. He does have Jellyfish Fields. But I think, like, as soon as he puts on, like, the New Yorker disguise and puts on the accent, we get a very different routine for the episode. It's like this episode has phases. It's like a Pokemon. We've just gotten out of the baby form. Now we're in, the standard form. And in a minute or two, it is going to evolve into its most ferocious form, for lack of a better term. And that leads into the most famous scene of the episode. But yeah, it's famous for a reason. It is interesting. By the way, Patrick working at the Krusty Krab, where have we seen that before? Oh yeah, Big Pink Loser back in the day. But it is a different dynamic. Instead of Patrick being SpongeBob's co-worker / assistant and just working on some menial stuff, now he's working behind the grill. He's making the patties, and I can see that incentivizing SpongeBob to want to stay at the Krusty Krab, just to keep the quality of the food higher than whatever Patrick is doing with it. And I think this scene it's funny and well-deserved on a character level. We get Mr. Krabs being just a little seedier and just leaving SpongeBob in the forest. It's hard to tell if it's the kelp forest. It's got slightly similar, floral things, flora. And you've got this funny bit. Again, this is the phase of the episode that's just funny bits, funny bits. I think from an animation standpoint, this episode's got some great expressions. A few errors slip in that you notice on repeat viewings, but it's not enough to, break the immersion of the episode. But one thing that might is, the stage direction of where the Krusty Krab is in relation to SpongeBob and Patrick's street, because this episode in particular feels like it's taunting you if you're into that mystery, because we've got these shots of SpongeBob and later SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs in the boatmobile going from right to left to see us going from the Krusty Krab back to Conch Street. But here we've got this shot of Patrick going from left to right. I don't know I guess some later episodes and visuals make it a big circle, so, kind of goes one way or the other. And I understand why the, board artist did it like this to give this left to right progression of Patrick going home. But it is kind of strange when you've got that on your mind and not what's happening in the episode, which it reaching its final form, the creepy phase. Not only are we approaching an era where they'll start to sneak horror motifs into completely normal episodes, as if the extra amount of horror-themed episodes in Season 4 wasn't enough. But we've also got them, reaching the apex of the story with SpongeBob seeming to have done something horrible to Patrick that I wouldn't say, but then, okay, it turns out he's fine. He's just at home watching Static. Oh, and of course, the ending is all for a single silver coin, whether it's a dime or a nickel. I can't really say. I'm not that good with American money. But, yeah, it's in Mr. Krabs' nature to go through all that effort just for the smallest of paychecks. So, yeah, funny episode, gets the job done. One of the comedic highlights of Season 4 for me, personally. And then we've got Wigstruck, which originally aired on November 17th, 2006, and was written by Luke Brookshire, Tom King, and Danny McKaylee, and my goodness is this an average one. When you hear about Season 4 on the internet, there are 3 diverging opinions on it. You've got, it's great from start to finish, it's middling from start to finish, and it's great at first and then gets more middling as it goes on. And this episode kind of reminds me why I skewer closer to that third opinion, because, man, there isn't that much to this episode. I mean, it's fine, it's worth a watch. There's some good jokes in it, but it also isn't really doing anything new or exciting or fascinating compared to episodes earlier in the season. But there are still some fun facts about this one. It was seen on DVD first on the Whale of a Birthday DVD, which was released on October 31st, 2006. We're getting closer to that time in 2024 as I record this. And, I guess there really isn't much else to say about this episode in terms of, the production behind it or how it was released. It's definitely, Season 4 episodes were coming out more regularly in this back half. They were coming out a bit faster. I guess Nickelodeon just wasn't as interested in keeping us waiting by this point, which is fair enough. And when I think about, this is the pairing of this portion of Season 4 that got nominated for an Emmy, it can't be for Wigstruck. It has to be for Bummer Vacation and how silly and fun that is. I don't know how Wigstruck can get any awards. I mean, I'm not calling the episode bad, but if you look at the Emmy nominations, I don't think this half of the episode pairing really makes it worthy of getting that award. I look at what it was up against with Avatar: The Last Airbender and South Park and think those episodes were definitely more worthy of the nomination. The Robot Chicken and Simpsons episode, I'm not so sure, but this episode is definitely holding episode 74 back for me personally, because it just feels like it's borrowing bits and bobs from previous ones. You've got, Patrick attacking SpongeBob from Home Sweet Pineapple through some sort of mishap. You've got SpongeBob, getting embarrassed in front of the Bikini Bottomites like in Grandma's Kisses, though there is a twist on the dynamic here with him being too naive to understand that he's embarrassing himself, which, I mean, regardless on how you feel about that scene in Grandma's Kisses, it does have its worth to the story that isn't fully executed in this variation in Wigstruck. And of course you've got SpongeBob messing something up at the Reef, the movie theater, as in Something Smells. But again, I don't think that the way it's handled here is as funny as in Something Smells. You've got that iconic line, look at it, look at it. Whereas this is, just starting a riot in 30 seconds. And I just gotta say, it was a really weird idea on the part of the production team to pair this with Bummer Vacation, because in that episode, part of the point of it is that SpongeBob doesn't like the idea of Patrick working the grill if he's not going to do it properly, cook the patties on his body. Whereas here, 11 minutes later, he's getting here in the patties completely unaware, so it's just not smart to put these episodes side by side and think that they'll make a cohesive character out of SpongeBob. But I'm not saying that this episode is completely unfunny. I do think that the idea of SpongeBob wearing a wig, it's an alright idea, but perhaps not for a whole episode. It fits his character as like this, nerd who's lacking in social wisdom, but it's not that funny in execution. It's not as funny as they're making it out to be. And I think that can be a problem when an episode is pretending, or, it gets the impression that it is funnier than it really is. But it's not completely without its jokes. I think my favorite scene in this episode, I understand now, is the scenes in the evening at closing time in the Krusty Krab when, Squidward and Mr. Krabs are making quips at SpongeBob, and he is still not getting the memo on how ridiculous the wig is. And, benefit of the doubt, the wig doesn't look too bad on SpongeBob. It fits his head shape. It's just, those wigs went out of style 200 years ago. It has to be in some sort of art movement for it to vaguely make any sort of coherent sense, which is why I think they've got it for a rock band. I don't really understand why this rock dude wanted to wear a wig in the first place. It's just sort of random that they chose a rock band, but I mean, Ned and the Needlefish, it's an alright idea for a rock band in SpongeBob. And they do bring them back later in the season 8 finale, Hello Bikini Bottom. But, yeah, this is my favorite scene of the episode. It's at least the funniest. It's got the most humor in it. But after that, you've got the scenes with SpongeBob and Sandy, and Sandy sort of tries and fails to make SpongeBob see the stupidity of the wig. It takes some scenes to get it through to him, and it's good that they're integrating Sandy more into regular episodes again, making her feel a bit closer to part of the cast. Because sometimes in season 4, when they use Sandy, it's for quote-unquote Sandy episodes, whereas you've got some later ones like this and The Gift of Gum, where she is part of the ensemble, and I like that. And she can offer something to SpongeBob. I think just because of the context of the show, we're out of the era of Sandy being the fish out of water, and with the way that SpongeBob is beginning to be characterized, we've got this new dynamic that's flipped. We've got, Sandy needing to provide the rules of the world to SpongeBob. At least that's what I think they're trying to do. And even more weird things about the wigs in this episode. Not only was it, gonna be a fashion statement for Ned and the Needlefish, but there are movies coming out about wigs, more than one. You've got a poster on the left side of the venue and a poster on the right side of the venue, so you can sort of look at the ending of this episode as playing into, or this is connected to the ending of the episode and how the media will, work its way to influence the populace. And it wasn't just Ned and the Needlefish making wigs a more popular thing for the public. It's also, movies coming out that are, going to influence the public. If enough factors come together, then, that'll work. I do like that part of the angry mob where the guy is wheeling out the old guy with the torch. And I can kind of see why they've made the ending of this episode a bit more melancholy, of SpongeBob throwing away the wig and giving up on something that he thought was cool and fashionable. But I don't think it's quite as impactful without, it's not as impactful with the conclusion coming up in a few minutes, where not only did wigs catch on within what seems like a few hours, it's the same day around the same time, but I think it just makes it less of a personal thing to SpongeBob, and it's definitely part of the joke that they've made wigs a big old fad in the world. Like, of course, no one is wearing these wigs in the next couple episodes. It's just saying something about trends and fads, and I see what they're going for. I think this episode actually could have been a bit more clever if it was doing something to comment on the popularity of SpongeBob in the 2000s. If it took a bit of a page out of the Krusty Sponge and, made this commentary about, hey, SpongeBob actually can be this trendsetter and make a big impact on the world. And you've got this line between SpongeBob and the green fish that sort of hints at something that just isn't there in this episode. Goodness, this was a very tough episode to talk over. It meanders. It's got some points to it, but just not that funny or, fascinating or well thought out. But far from the worst, and that was Bummer Vacation and Wigstruck. My question time for you last time is, what is your favorite zombie outbreak episode in any sort of animated media? A lot of great answers. Brendan Barney said The Joy from Gumball. We've got to check that out. Sparkling with Nights said The Joy. Scarioki from Gravity Falls. Jack and the Zombies from Samurai Jack. Krabby Patty Creature Feature from SpongeBob. And Dial Z for Zombies from The Simpsons. I just watched Scarioki for my Gravity Falls review the other day. It is a really great episode. That's good taste. Bryce Fawn says Dial Z for Zombies and Krabby Patty Creature Feature. Spongy the Editor also said The Joy from Gumball, but also Night of the Living Pharmacists from Phineas and Ferb. That is one I forgot about, but that is excellent too. Pepe Le Pew said The Joy, the first episode of Adventure Time. I've seen that a couple of years ago. It was pretty funny. And Night of the Living Pharmacist as well. And lastly, Random Lad said tie between Krabby Patty Creature Feature or The Simpsons' other zombie segment, Don't Have a Cow, Mankind, and I can kind of see why people would prefer that one. It's more intense to say the least, and at least Homer doesn't have automatic immunity in it, so there's that, if you cared about the first one being too unbalanced. My question time for you for this week is, what's your favorite movie within SpongeBob? Like, a movie that our characters are going to see, so not like a real-life SpongeBob movie like the one with Neptune's Crown or Sponge Out of Water or anything. Something like the Mermaid Man and Barnacle movie in here that, SpongeBob and Patrick made, or just any sort of parody movie that they would have watched in the theater or on TV. Mine would probably have to be Night of the Robot. I want to see what that was about. So that's it for this edition of SpongeComs. Next week we've got internal changes in Squidtastic Voyage and external modifications in That's No Lady. Goodbye for now.